Good evening and welcome to Tysky Sour. We have 5 great stories for you tonight. A preview of Labour conference. Can a stitch-up be averted? We've also got a resignation from the shadow cabinet. Rumours about an early election. Andrew Neil getting owned on Question Time. And Rupert Murdoch's latest signing. To discuss all of this, I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. How are you doing, Aaron?
Hello, Michael. I'm very well. Very glad to be joining you this fine evening.
Always a pleasure to have you, Aaron. You know the score. We want to hear your opinions and your questions as well. You can put those out on the hashtag TyskySour on Twitter or in the comments below this video. Do hit subscribe if you haven't already. First story. We are just 1 week away from the first Labour conference under the leadership of Keir Starmer, and there are already debates raging about a potential incoming stitch-up. The 2 big controversies concern which rule changes the party's ruling body will recommend to conference and which policy proposals will be debated. On the rule changes, according to Labour list, the NEC will propose the following. For representatives and candidates, they will propose waivers to the 1-year membership requirement. That's going to be delegated to the NEC as it sees fit. They will also mandate compulsory training for any member standing for selection and suggest a new power for the NEC to discipline candidates or representatives for having acted in a way considered prejudicial and grossly detrimental to the party. There are also rule changes concerning members. They include a probationary period of provisional membership, during which time an application for members can be rejected for any reason which the General Secretary sees fit. That rule is probably what's seen as most worrying. Many believe that means the leadership will be able to purge people automatically if they join in any, or to vote in any future leadership election, I should say. The second controversy relates to policy. In particular, many have expressed outrage that the Conference Arrangements Committee have decided to rule out of order a motion put forward by the group Labour for a Green New Deal. The motion was submitted by 21 local Labour parties and backed by Momentum. It called for mass investment in green technologies, the expansion and electrification of public transport, including free local bus networks, a just climate adaptation, investing in fire and rescue services, flood defences and resilient infrastructure, retrofitting all homes by 2030 with mandatory building standards, and universal basic services, including a national care service and universal free broadband. The Conference Arrangement Committee said this had been ruled out of order because it covers more than one subject, so it won't be voted on, it won't be heard by conference. Aaron, Momentum have called the rule changes a bureaucratic stitch-up and the ruling out of the Green New Deal motion a disgraceful rejection of our responsibility to each other and to future generations. Do you think they're right?
Yeah, there's 2 questions here. So the first is about the discretionary powers being given to the NEC and to David Evans. I think in particular what's most sort of brazen in its mendacity and lying and political hypocrisy is the fact that there will be these people who can come in, and I don't really see a problem with this, who can come in and can become candidates without having previously been Labour Party members. That's fine. These were it's consistent. You can see why somebody would do it. You could argue Corbyn should have done it. How is that consistent, however, with this being the same party political faction, people like Luke Akehurst and so on, who previously said, well, sorry, in 2016, you can't vote in the leadership election because you haven't been a member for more than 6 months. And so clearly there is an instrumentalization here, a politicking going on here, where when things aren't in their favour, they'll do one thing. The minute it is in their favour, they'll do the complete opposite. And I say that and I start with that because it then leads us on to the Green New Deal and climate change. Luke Akehurst will happily, and people like him, his fellow travellers, Labour First, David Evans, and quite frankly, Keir Starmer, people on the Labour right, and their support. At this point, when this is happening, I think anybody who's supporting Keir Starmer, not saying, I'm not saying that anybody who doesn't think he should be gotten rid of is supporting Keir Starmer, but active supporters of Keir Starmer think he's doing a good job. I think at this point you have to say you can't be on the left. You can't be. If you're not even going to have a meaningful policy on climate change, you're not on the left. And it does encompass, I think, Starmer supporters in the media, right? People that we might think of as on the soft left. Zoe Williams, Paul Mason, the people that backed him previously. I don't know if Tom Kibasi or Laura Parker still backs him. I don't know. I suspect not with these policies, but if they do with these policies, particularly on climate change, you have to really question left credentials. There's no need to get personal here. I personally don't think they do. I think Starmer's turning off many, many people with this, but that's kind of where we are right now. I think we're looking at a very, very surprisingly hard right Labour project. I didn't expect it, to be quite honest, particularly on climate, because that's an issue which can elide class. But what we see on climate change reflects the previous point I made around sort of this politicking around certain things. And I think people like Akehurst and the Labour right will happily talk about climate change if they think it's going to help them. Frankly, however, they have absolutely zero real interest in doing anything about it. And some of the names I just listed previously as the supporters of Keir Starmer, I think clearly do. I think many people who voted for him clearly do. And so I think this is a real moment of fundamental realization about what the Starmer project is, the Starmer leadership is, both in terms of how it wants to basically railroad things through the party, centralize the party, completely get rid of democratic policy making. In 2019, at 2019 conference, policy making was being driven from the bottom up, whether it was the Brexit policy, you can agree or disagree, whether it was on the Green New Deal, whether it was on private schools. It was being driven by members. That's gone. And then secondly, on climate change, frankly, I think they're well to the right, even of people like Joe Biden. And I think anybody who's moderately progressive looks at that and thinks, my God, this man probably isn't who I thought he is.
I mean, I don't think we really disagree on the motivations of Keir Starmer and the people around him. The argument that the Conference Arrangement Committee have made, so they're the group of people who decide what does get voted on at conference. So they've said this motion just covered too many things. So it wasn't just about climate change, because it also promised free broadband for everyone. So they said it was essentially just putting lots of the 2019 manifesto into one motion about climate change. Do you think there's anything to that at all?
Well, there's a few inconsistencies here. So other motions were submitted by affiliate organisations, not by CLPs, including trade unions, which looked like this, and they've gone through. So I don't agree with that. I think you probably could take out, for instance, the National Care Service. Other than the National Care Service aspect, I don't see why this would be stopped. And we're talking about climate change, Michael. So addressing climate change in the Green New Deal, it is about rewilding. It is about reducing CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. It is about, building zero carbon infrastructure for the future. It is about retrofitting the built environment to make it more energy efficient. I thought that was actually, because you saw the spin coming out again from people like Luke Akehurst on Twitter. You actually read what it's saying. I thought it was surprisingly pithy. Okay, maybe you want to take out the national. I think we should have a National Care Service, but maybe take that out. But other than that, I thought it was entirely coherent. And let's see what Labour First are putting forward with theirs. And they're saying there's no targets, no numbers involved. You've got to have targets. Christ almighty, Michael. Look at the summer we've just had. You've got to have targets in any policy proposal around the Green New Deal. You can't just have vague ambitions. We'd like to do this, we'd like to do that. It's not the 1990s anymore. We're seeing high 40s in the Arctic, in Canada, right? We're seeing record wildfires across Siberia, California, Southern Europe. We saw in China, a year's worth of rain, I think, fell in 3 hours in one place. These extreme weather events are becoming more frequent, more intense. You can't have vague aspirations. Be serious. And there's an important line in management. You can't manage what you don't measure, and you can't measure what you don't, sort of quantify. So if you've got a climate proposal like the Labour right with no numbers, quite frankly, it's not worth the paper it's written on.
I mean, I'd potentially say, you probably can have a Green New Deal without free broadband, but at the same time, it does seem,
I don't agree with that.
pretty factional to just say this is a left-wing campaign group. We're going to throw it out altogether instead of try and change it to something the leadership find a bit more acceptable. Let's move on to the other dramatic clash, which is going to happen at conference. This will be on its first day. That's when there'll be a vote on whether to confirm David Evans as General Secretary. He's controversial because of the many spurious expulsions which have been handed out to left-wing party members since he took charge. Both John McDonnell and Luke Akehurst, who is chair of the right-wing faction Labour First, spoke to Radio 4 about the conflict regarding Evans.
The best thing to Keir and David Evans to do is get people around the table, accept that there are grievances there that have to be addressed. But to be frank, I think he does lack an element of political experience. He hasn't been in politics that long. So therefore, I think what he needs to do is just engage more.
But Luke Akehurst insists that Keir Starmer would have nothing to fear from engaging in a public battle.
I think it's absolutely absurd. The most extraordinary demonisation of David Evans is going on. I am sure that they will force a vote, and I welcome that because it will expose the rather low level of support that they have.
So Luke Akehurst is very confident that if that vote does take place, David Evans will win it handily. Obviously, this will come down to the political persuasions of the delegates who get elected. Will they be on the left or the right of the party? And then also how the trade unions vote. For background information, at Labour Party conference, votes are 50% trade unions, 50% members, and in the trade unions, they're weighted to the number of affiliated members they have. So unions such as Unite and Unison and GMB are central. Are you as convinced as Luke Akehurst is that the right will easily win this one and David Evans would be confirmed?
Yeah, I think they would. I don't see why he wouldn't be confirmed. I mean, I don't think he should be confirmed. I was having this debate with Andrew Fisher on Twitter, former advisor to John McDonnell. And, there's the argument, well, the left shouldn't call for him to not be confirmed if you can't win it. Put that to one side. If the guy is put forward to a vote, do you think he should be the General Secretary or not? And I think going on the evidence of the last 12 years, he is terrible. And so, no, I don't think whether you're a trade unionist, whether you're a CLP delegate, you should be voting for somebody who's not very good at the job. I mean, maybe that's a really radical idea, Michael. Somebody who's laying off staff, didn't liaise properly with trade unions to the extent that they were considering strike action during conference. They're losing money hand over fist. They made payouts they didn't need to make. It's not an effective organisation. It's done very poorly in elections, quite frankly. And look, the organisation under Jeremy Corbyn was often a mess, but had lots of money, growing membership. It had 2 good sets of local elections. It was building in new competencies and it was formulating policy. I don't see any of that with David Evans. And what I would say is it's fantastic that there's going to be a vote on David Evans becoming the General Secretary. That's good. And I don't think that's because the left are going to win. I think it's because it's really important that all those people say, I want that guy as, I think he should be elected, by the way. They say, I want that guy as General Secretary. Because then if he's terrible and if he continues on the same path, wasting the money of the GMB, wasting the money of Unison, wasting the money of other trade unions and fundamentally all members subs, then those people are accountable for it. Great. That's what you should do. And to that extent, I'm surprised that something like Unison and GMB would vote in somebody who is clearly wasting their money to such an extraordinary extent, but let them do it. And then that's in the record book. And you say next time it goes up, we want a General Secretary to do X, Y, Z. Well, last time you backed this guy and he was terrible. He didn't help with policy formulation. The electoral results weren't great. We lost money. We lost members. Maybe let's not listen to the people that made that decision last time. So I think it's good to have all this stuff out in the open. Equally, if he does well, then the unions that back him, the CLPs that back him say, look, we were right. Why not have it out in the open? I don't understand this, which is why I backed an elected General Secretary 2 years ago. And that drew a great deal of opprobrium from the left and some Corbyn supporters because they thought the left was going to control the party forever. And so they could fix things bureaucratically and it didn't really matter. You don't need to democratize the party. Well, sadly, they were wrong. I mean, it's not something I wanted to be right about. But here we are. So I think the more that's done out in the open, the more that's accountable, the more it's transparent, the better. That's good. It's not just good because it's democratic. It leads to better outcomes in the long term.
No, I didn't see your conversation with Andrew Fisher on Twitter. We should say it was a Corbyn advisor more recently than it was a McDonnell one.
Sorry, yes.
But I suppose that there are 2 issues, aren't there? So one is, should people vote against David Evans? Absolutely. Obviously, he's a terrible General Secretary. You're talking about the financial situation he's left the party in. More importantly, I think for most members is the amount of people he's expelled on very, very spurious grounds. He's obviously an incredibly factional operator with no care for members' rights or creating an inclusive party. The other issue, though, is how big a deal do you make about a vote which you're likely to lose? And that's where I saw some sort of controversy about McDonnell and what he'd said on Radio 4. Because as I understand it, his interventions seem to be motivated by an idea, look, the Labour right will probably win that vote because of big unions such as Unison and GMB. So it would be unwise for the left to make a big deal out of this vote. So sure, vote against David Evans, but don't make an all or nothing contest out of it. And I suppose that's why he's trying to sort of downplay the significance of it a bit and saying, no, let's have a meeting with Keir Starmer instead.
A meeting with Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer doesn't give 2 hoots what John McDonnell thinks.
He's not going to have a summit with the left, which is what.
Also, I think John McDonnell still thinks it's like 2018, and he's got these. It's like you're playing Risk, and he's moving his pieces around the board of the map of the world. John's pieces have left. Evans is expelling them. Right? All the social power of the left lies in its membership. And these people are leaving because they're not being offered any leadership. So I don't really agree with John. I think this kind of attitude he's got of just constantly deferring to people and calling it strategy, I think is wrong. On the other hand, I do agree that, of course, it shouldn't be made to be a big issue. It's not a big issue. You would do it knowing the right's going to win. But I think the point is, okay, then explicitly back this guy and say he's going to do a good job and make the case for him. Because right now, after a year, we've not seen it. I don't see what the harm in that is. When has it been a bad thing to say, well, look, there are questions over this guy. Let's have a vote.
I mean, it'll be interesting. I should say, I suppose. I mean, I think in defence of John McDonnell, I think he knows he's dealing. He's building strategy with a bad hand. So calling for members to rise up against David Evans, calling for a meeting with Keir Starmer. In a way, the left is quite weak at the moment, so neither of them are going to turn out particularly well. So I kind of sit on the fence as to which one to go for. We'll try not to be as depressing as this when the conference actually starts. There will, of course, be the very dynamic and historically wonderful The World Transformed Festival. Tysky will be doing 2 live shows from there on the Saturday and the Sunday. Let's go to a couple of comments before our next story. On the GND motion, Rajia D says on the YouTube super chat, I would have thought climate change policies would have been very popular, and why shouldn't lots of good ideas be presented at conference? That would be the reasonable argument in favour of putting lots of different policies in one particular motion. I mean, one of the things that's always motivated the Green New Deal, both here and in the United States, as you say, climate policy in its own right isn't necessarily going to be popular, so you have to put in some goodies to get it through. This argument that you have to do more than climate policy to build a bigger movement around these demands. It's a reasonable argument. Remember, you can get in touch with us by tweeting on the hashtag TyskySour. Next story. Marsha de Cordova has resigned as Shadow Equalities Secretary in the most high-profile resignation yet from Starmer's top team. De Cordova announced her resignation in a tweet. She wrote, "It has been an immense privilege to serve as the Shadow Women and Equality Secretary for the past 17 months. It therefore comes with much sadness that I am resigning with immediate effect. Having only been elected in 2017 for the historically marginal constituency of Battersea, I would like to focus more of my time and efforts on the people of Battersea. I will continue to support Keir Starmer from the backbenches." That tweet doesn't make the resignation sound particularly contentious. That was a very polite resignation tweet, but according to an article in The Voice, there were political disagreements underlying de Cordova's decision. They report, associates of Battersea MP claim that the party failed to put her on a single media round during 17 months in the job, and that she was offered just 5 minutes speaking time at Labour's annual conference, which takes place next week. Sources said that efforts to set up a task force of experts to design progressive race equality policy were held back over concerns this might upset Red Wall voters, and that Starmer had resisted pleas to make a speech setting out his vision to black communities. They also quote a friend of de Cordova who told The Voice, "It's been bubbling for a while. She just wasn't being supported. And the bottom line was you can only do so much before it becomes difficult. And it did become very difficult. She always had a goal that she wanted Keir to speak authentically about race. And despite her trying, it just was never going to happen." Marsha wanted to develop Labour's vision for race equality, but kept meeting stumbling blocks. Even to just put out comments on things, it was watered down. Challenging the Prime Minister, you're not allowed to do that. It's the people around Starmer, his team, they don't understand race or the importance of it. Aaron, I want your thoughts on this. This resignation hasn't received too much coverage in the press. You might think this would create some negative coverage around Keir Starmer. It hasn't really made a ripple. Do you think this is a big deal?
It is a big deal, and it's also because it's part of a broader pattern, and people might not know that because it's barely being talked about. You had, about a year ago now, Emma Hardy pull back from the shadow cabinet to focus on her constituency. It's in Hull, I believe. It's a Leave voting constituency. The reason why is because she thinks she might lose it. You're going to see that more and more. Then a few weeks ago, you saw something similar with Luke Pollard taking a step back. You're seeing these are all for different reasons, of course. Now you're seeing Marsha Cordova stepping back. You're seeing moves with Charlotte Nichols. I don't quite know the full story here. I've not heard the full story, but she's been moved effectively by mutual agreement, as I understand it. And what this would suggest to you is the poor polling, the sort of enmity towards Keir Starmer from big parts of the membership, not all of it, but from big parts of the membership. And then you've got people who should be your allies. You know, Marsha Cordova, she nominated Keir Starmer to be Labour leader. You know, she's on the left, but she nominated Keir Starmer to be Labour leader. And as I understand it, her major misgivings about Starmer are, as identified in this Voice article, one, he's nowhere on race, absolutely nowhere on race. And then two, he is kind of apparently, or the people around him, and people always say the people around him as if it's some court. You know, the monarch's never to blame; it's always the courtiers. They want to basically just completely eviscerate the left and get them out of the party. That's their number one priority. And I think for anybody who looks at the climate, who looks at Black Lives Matter, who looks at the housing crisis, who looks at COVID-19, that is insane. It looks ridiculous and crazy. They don't want to be a part of that. And I don't think you have to be on the left or a radical to think that. And so I think Marsha saw that. She saw the race stuff, and I think she's taking a step back. And I don't think she'll lose her seat, but I think that seat in Battersea wasn't Labour until 2017, so she will have to work to keep it. And people think, oh well, Starmer's going to keep all of Labour's voters from 2019. In big cities, I personally don't think he will, and I think she'll have a reduced majority. And so I think there's that calculus too, like with Emma Hardy. So we'll see. I think it is a big story. Because I think if you've got people who 2 years out from an election that's looking like 2023 are already saying, I can't serve in the shadow cabinet, well, you get quite a small talent pool in the end for Labour. And I think that plus the race side of this, big story. And again, this stuff just isn't being covered by The Guardian, by the liberal left press, because they don't really care. They don't really care about these things, just like they don't really care about climate change, quite frankly. So yeah, but I think it is a big story. And I think something's going on under the surface, Michael. I think there's many, many, many people within the Parliamentary Labour Party who have big misgivings about Starmer and the people around him, particularly on policy, particularly on comms. You've had the whole team effectively swept out after Batley and Spen. People don't really know who these other people are. And if you're in a constituency with a 1,500, 2,000 majority, you're going to be thinking, oh, these people might lose me my job. And I think there's a lot of MPs thinking like that right now.
It's interesting, isn't it? I was thinking about this today because on the one hand, I think the reason, the Guardian, etc., aren't making a big deal about this is because they don't enjoy criticising Keir Starmer in the same way they enjoyed criticising Jeremy Corbyn. At the same time, you might ask, if Marsha Cordova has these critiques, why not include that in the tweet? Because it would have been harder to ignore then, wouldn't it? So I don't know, what do you think about that? Why do you think we've got this situation where the Voice have been briefed that this was about political disagreements, and then the MP has officially said, oh, actually, this is because I want to spend more time in my constituency? How would someone make sense of that?
Well, the way I read it is, and this could be wrong, she's only been an MP for 4 years. People say Starmer's inexperienced. She's only been an MP for 4 years. And I think she resigned. She didn't want it to be messy. I think it's easy if you're just basically seeking re-election, go to the backbenchers. You don't want to cause a drama. But the reality is, if you resign, if you don't say why you've resigned, people will create reasons as to why you've resigned, and you have to say why you've resigned. So you get claims about, well, it was racism. Oh, it's because she's on the left. It's because of LGBT stuff. As I understand, it's got nothing to do with LGBT stuff. I mean, I might be wrong, but like you say, she's not directly stated why she's leaving. My understanding is about Starmer's position on race and the fact that basically the people around him aren't serious about power; they're serious about eviscerating the left. But like I say, I think she should state it quite clearly. You don't need to be mean and aggressive and belligerent. But like I say, if you don't give your reasons, somebody else will, and they may not be true. So you need to tell your own side of the story.
It'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to know Marsha's side of the story. But yeah, I mean, there are obviously a number of reasons why, as a newish MP, you wouldn't just want to come out and say, I'm resigning, I'm now declaring war on Keir Starmer. So I can also see the other side of the argument, which is to sort of step down quietly and bide your time. If you're enjoying tonight's show, let us know by hitting the like button. We currently have 1,500 people watching, but only 250 likes. The Daily Telegraph, the Tories' newspaper of choice, is reporting that we could be in line for an early general election. They quote Oliver Dowden, who has just been made co-chair of the Conservatives, as telling staff it's time to go to our offices and prepare for the next election. They report that while the working assumption inside number 10 is that Boris Johnson will go to the country in May or June 2024, the Telegraph understands he is also eyeing up a year earlier, so that would be May or June 2023. The rumours about an early election come as the Tories retake the lead in opinion polls. In a survey released today by YouGov, the Tories are up 6 points on last week to 39%, while Labour have stood still on 35%. I thought Carl Shobin today, who used to work for Corbyn, now works for Salvation, had a very interesting take on this. He said, get up this tweet, "This is now becoming fixed into the political weather unless Labour does something fundamental to change the cycle. When the Conservatives do something bad, Labour catches up for a few days, sits back, and within days, it's back to normal. Normal being the Conservatives in the lead." Aaron, do you reckon we'll have an election earlier than it otherwise would have been? So we're definitely going to have one by 2024. Rumours now that it will be in 2023. And will it matter when it is, in terms of who's going to be in a stronger position to win it?
Such a hard question, Michael. Such a hard question. You know, some of it is based on contingency. You know, Gordon Brown looked at an early general election, then decided against it. Ultimately, that probably cost him winning the election. If you look at the economics right now, I think 2023 makes more sense. Then we're going to come out of we're going to go basically now into a mini boom because obviously there's loads of pent up demand in the global economy. You're seeing it with supply chain issues. You know, demand's outstripping supply. We can't find enough workers to do certain jobs, so wages are going up. Of course, that's going to lead to some price rises too. We're seeing inflation for basic commodities. But what you're going to see is quite a rare thing in the next 12 months, which is lots of new jobs, wage increases, lots of final demand for the consumer. That's kind of rare, that all coming together. So I think it would make sense to call an election sooner rather than later. Of course, you want to have COVID well and truly behind you. I personally don't think COVID is going to be well and truly behind us by, say, next spring. I think it's very possible this winter goes very, very badly wrong. It might not. You know, we were saying by now we might have 100,000 new cases a day. Turns out it's about 35,000. I want to be wrong, but I think there's a major possibility that the government have got this very, very, very badly wrong again this winter, just like last year. Not as bad, but bad, pretty bad. The ceiling is much lower because, of course, the majority of the adult population has been vaccinated, but it still could be very, very bad. So I think 2023 sounds reasonable. And you're looking at Starmer. Maybe you want him to carry on as long as possible because you just want the Labour Party to tear itself apart. But then you've also got the issues of Scotland, of Wales. Hard one. I think 2023 is the most reasonable one, however. I think that's the most sensible. Have let's say 18 months of normality post-COVID and this little mini economic boom. That would work.
I mean, the other thing this will affect, because it's very difficult to guess, isn't it? The reason Gordon Brown postponed an election in 2007, I think it was because he got cold feet about different taxes which are being proposed. Then obviously the financial crisis happened and Labour were screwed after that. So it could be that Boris Johnson says, I'll hold off till 2024, and then we get another massive economic crisis which he wasn't foreseeing. Something which is potentially more guessable, I suppose, in terms of what it will have impact on is the internal politics of the Labour Party. Because if we think at this point, odds are the Conservatives are going to win the next general election, it could be quite significant whether or not Keir Starmer and David Evans have 18 months to reshape the Labour Party in their image, or whether they have 2.5 years. So there might be people in Labour HQ who are really interested in what timetable they are being given to transform the Labour Party. I think, potentially if there hadn't been a snap election in 2019, Corbyn and Jenny Formby would have been able to transform the Labour Party to a greater degree, so that it couldn't just get retaken by the right and them stitch it up to basically expel anyone they didn't like. So it could be that this snap election, if it does happen, undermines Keir Starmer's attempt to lock out the left forever.
Yeah, there's a nice symmetry there, but I don't think Keir Starmer's going anywhere. I think Keir Starmer could be absolutely decimated, and he wouldn't. I think he could do far worse than 2019, and he'd still stay in place. What's going to change? What would matter is decisively Unison, GMB, the trade unions. The media will cover his arse. of course, it could be that the defeat is so big, and I don't think it would be. I think Labour would, generally speaking, keep the same as what they got, 32%, probably more. Of course, the problem is where is that going to come from? And you could see them losing a few seats in the North East. You could see them losing a few more seats in the West Midlands. Overnight, for instance, look, it's just one council by-election. But the Labour candidate got walloped, a good candidate, I'm told, in Middlesbrough. And the Labour vote went down something like 38%. Okay, it's just one council by-election, but clearly something important is happening in the North East. We saw it with Hartlepool too. And so I think Labour could get 32, 33%, same as last time, maybe even a bit better. But, actually, they don't pick any seats up in Scotland. They don't pick any seats up in Wales, particularly with boundary changes. They'll actually lose seats regardless of performance, really. And they'll lose seats in the West Midlands and in the North East. And the real net beneficiaries in terms of vote share, not necessarily seats, but vote share, would be the Lib Dems in the south of England. Under those conditions, I kind of struggle to see how he would stay on, but I think his ambition would be to stay on. And I think the people around him would, very predictably say, well, Neil Kinnock had 2 bites of the cherry. Christ. Jeremy Corbyn had 2 bites of the cherry. Well, he had the second go because 2017 was a success. So I suppose for Starmer, if he gets anything above 32%, he can say, well, I've earned my opportunities to stay. And I think that's a fair thing to say. I wouldn't agree with it. I think ultimately it comes down to seats. If he loses seats and the vote share stays the same, I think he has to go. But who's going to push him, Michael? Who's going to push him? John McDonnell? The Guardian newspaper? Unison, the trade union? Nobody. No. So I don't really know. I don't know what's going to happen. Members are going to leave? He wants members to leave. So it's a really tough one to sort of predict. I think ultimately it's going to come down to if he's embarrassed, yes, he will need to go. And also fundamentally, the party runs out of money. If the big donors don't come back, and the big donors aren't going to come back if the party is clearly in a downward spin, even after 2019, and you don't have the members, and trade unions kind of recognize that this isn't really where they are maximizing resources, then I think he probably would be pushed out. And also, ultimately MPs are not going to back a guy who they think are making them particularly vulnerable. And so if more and more MPs think he's going to lose their seats at the next time of asking, yeah, he'll go. But I think they're probably planning to lose the next election. I think that is the plan. And he'll be staying in place.
I mean, the issue is that, who's going to push? I mean, I do think that probably, if he did lose a general election, I think John McDonnell and the Socialist Campaign Group would mount a challenge. Potentially, if he just lost an election as well, you would be able to get some of the soft left MPs in and trigger a leadership election. So it's not impossible that he would be toppled. I don't think he would resign of his own accord, but you could imagine the situations where a leadership challenge happens, and it will depend to what degree Evans and Starmer have, by that point in time, managed to stitch up the internal politics of the Labour Party so that a left-winger can't possibly win again. I imagine that's going to be, the real story about this conference and next year's conference, is them making sure that if and when Keir Starmer loses a leadership election, if there is to be a challenge, he will either win or be replaced by someone from the same wing of the party. Interesting. I mean, the next general election is obviously going to be an ongoing story on this show, so we'll come back to that another time. Let's go on to our next story. After months of speculation, this week Andrew Neil quit as lead presenter and chairman of GB News. His first media appearance after making the announcement was on BBC's Question Time. This is how he explained his decision.
In the run-up to the launch, through the launch, and in the aftermath of the launch, and I think most of you who know anything about it will know that you couldn't file the launch under startling success, more and more differences emerged between myself and the other senior managers and the board of GB News. And rather than these differences narrowing, they got wider and wider. And I felt it was best that if that's the route they wanted to take, then that's up to them. It's their money.
What was that route?
And the route is what I think is what you can see on GB News at the moment. People should make up their own minds as to whether that's what they want to watch. I thought it wasn't for me, and I had wanted a different route. Doesn't mean I'm right or they're wrong, but it certainly was a difference.
And is it because you felt they were going too far to the right?
I also spent the summer looking at all the work.
No, I'm asking, is it that you felt they were going too far to the right?
People should make up their own minds on that.
No, but we're just wondering why you.
What I've told you is that the differences were such that the direction they were going in was not the direction that I had outlined. It was not the direction that I had envisaged for the channel. But I was in minority of one. So it's doing what it's doing, and it's up to them. Good luck to them if that's what they want to do. But it wasn't going to be with me. You know, lockdown and the summer and all the rest of it made us rethink our priorities as well. And I decided it was time I had to cut down on some of my commitments and perhaps maybe enjoy myself a little bit more. Now I even get to appear on Question Time every now and then, which I haven't done for 2 decades. And that given that these differences has emerged, these disagreements of the direction of the channel and the way it was going, and many other things too, I don't want to bore you with, it seemed to me that one of the commitments I should give up is GB News. And that's what I've done. I'm very comfortable with it. Indeed, I feel at peace with myself as a result. People know my kind of journalism, and that's what I'm going to stick to.
People know my kind of journalism, and that's what I'm going to stick to. The implication is clear. Andrew Neil wanted to launch a channel that was independent-minded and freed from the stifling culture of the BBC, but he had no intention of creating a Farage-fronted far-right outlet spreading misinformation about COVID and inciting hatred against asylum seekers. By leaving, he is now at peace with himself. How noble of Andrew Neil. Thankfully, that self-serving account given by Neil did not go unchallenged on Question Time. This was the response of author Nels Abbey.
So I know there's a cabinet reshuffle going on, and I've had to do my own too. So I came with something from my own cabinet or so. And it's just...
What does that say? We can't see it here on the panel.
Andrew might remember these days or so. So it says, why Britain's new TV news channel won't be woke. So... And I thought to myself, I'd just bring that along. And for the benefit of those at home, also, I bought a bigger copy too. So there we go. So Andrew can.
So go on, you might have to. Everyone is familiar with GB News, so you might have to explain why you brought that.
So GB News. Sorry, with everybody's not familiar with GB News. It's the
well.
Okay, so
the viewing figures would suggest that not everyone is familiar.
Absolutely, you're right. Absolutely, they're kind of close to zero viewers on an ongoing basis for a long time now. GB News was set up, as it says over here in black and white, and a channel that was intended to not be quote-unquote woke. That it was going to be a channel that was going to fight the quote-unquote culture wars. I posited to you, Andrew, that you actually knew exactly what you guys were setting up. That you were setting up, when you used the term like woke as a pejorative, I put it to you that you knew exactly who that dog whistle, you exactly knew the dog you were blowing that whistle at.
So why am I not still there?
That's up to you. Well, why were you there to begin with when you're doing that?
If you're saying that what's happened is what I wanted, why would I be here tonight and not still?
Because I think, well, I'll give you my reason.
You don't know me.
No, I'll give you my reason. I'll give you my perception.
You're assuming things of which you have no knowledge whatsoever.
Well, I'll give you my perception of how I view things. So I think GB News. I think GB News, when it launched up, was actually a very, very shoddy platform. So it came out. It was embarrassing to watch. To Beatrice, it's not going to be Fox News. It's not Fox News by any means. Fox News actually has very, very decent production values or so, and very well thought through programming. GB News is by no means whatsoever Fox News. It's actually a very inferior product to almost anything on the market. But what we actually had, what GB News did represent, is the exact same thing that Fox News represented, which was for the purpose of re-mainstreaming and maintaining almost a cocktail of bigotries within our nation.
You can see how effective that attack line was, because Andrew Neil resorted to accusing the speaker of prejudices. I hate to break it to Andrew Neil, but being a white man journalist who joins a right-wing outlet, that's not a protected characteristic. It's not prejudicial to make judgments about someone based on what that individual has said and done in the past. Aaron, did Nels Abbey hit the target there?
Yeah, Michael, I think just following up from what you just said, it's not prejudiced. He's not prejudging anything. Yeah. He's observing what you're doing, and he's making conclusions from his own observations. I mean, that's just judiced. It's just the judging bit. There's no pre involved. So I thought when he said, "Oh, it's got even lower production values than Fox," and it cuts to Andrew Neil's face, I thought that's one of the best moments of television I've seen on Question Time in a really, really long while. You could see he was seething. And I think the way that Neil started at the start of that clip, when he starts talking about how we just want to take it in different directions, good luck to them, etc. When there's somebody like Andrew Neil from that generation with his politics, when they say good luck to them, it means for any of our audience out there, listeners or viewers who aren't British, it means I really hope you fucking fail. That's what it means. Good luck to them. So that's where we are, I think. It's a really strange sort of way things have played out. I remember speaking to Andrew Neil a couple of years ago. You were there actually, Michael, and I did BBC This Week. And you could see he wanted out of the BBC and he wanted to try something new. He's really fascinated by media as a world. He's previously involved in the Sunday Times, The Economist. And he wanted to do something over here, which was like Fox. He just did. The former, anyway, if not the politics. And it's just been so catastrophically pulled off. I kind of wonder, did he think it was ever going to be any different? And that would be a really interesting interview. I don't think it's about the politics. I agree with that conclusion. It's actually about just how shoddy and ramshackle it is. And that's a real affront to a man of Andrew Neil's sense of self. He's worked for some of the most important media outlets in the world. He helped start up Sky News. By the way, he helped go and start up Fox News in the early days. Like I say, it was at the Sunday Times. He was previously at The Economist. He was, of course, working for the BBC, who I expect to take him back, by the way, with open arms. Expect Andrew Neil to be hosting the BBC's election coverage in 2023. And I think that's what hurt him most. As somebody who likes to be associated with top production values, that wasn't happening at GB News.
Well, I didn't know that. So Andrew Neil was involved in the creation of Fox News as well, was he?
Yeah. So he was at the Sunday Times from 83 to 92, something like that. He was at the Sunday Times the best part of 10 years. He doesn't replace Larry Evans, but he replaces the one after Larry Evans. You go from actually quite a progressive, interesting journalist to somebody else, and then I think it's Andrew Neil, or maybe he directly replaces Larry Evans. I think it's Larry Evans. I've got David Evans in my head. It's not David Evans, it's Larry Evans, I think. And then towards the end of that, Murdoch kind of, for some reason, just doesn't like him anymore, wants him out. And of course, Murdoch is starting at this point Sky News. So he says to Andrew Neil, like, why don't you go and help start this project up? Andrew Neil starts it up. He's not in front of camera like Adam Bolton, but who, by the way, was there at the beginning. But he was sort of helping the whole project get going. And then after that, he says, I want to send you to America to work on Fox News. So he goes to work in New York. Not for very long, I think 6 months, a year, something like that. So he was there right at the beginning of Fox News before it's this massive channel. And he had a role in its initial growth, for sure. They piloted a few shows where he would be the anchor and so on, didn't work out. But he was the guy who'd basically executed Sky News for Murdoch, who then went to the US and worked on Fox News. Because, of course, Murdoch owns the Sunday Times, at that time owned Sky News, and, of course, Fox News as well. And Andrew Neil in the 1980s and early 1990s was known as Rupert Murdoch's Rottweiler. Very strange that he then worked for the BBC and everybody says the BBC's left wing, but there we are.
That's really interesting because, I mean, even if you take him at his word that he does think the politics of GB News is now repulsive and he does think the politics of Fox News is now repulsive, you might then ask, this is the second time this has happened, Andrew Neil. This is the second time you've been used for your status and your stature to get going a media operation which ends up being an absolutely malicious force in society. How many more times are you going to be used to such a malignant end? You've got to ask, what are you doing with yourself? Could you not see this coming? I didn't know that he had this Fox News background as well. He just keeps helping birth cancers into our media ecology. What a legacy to have. We're going to go on to our next story after I make a shout out for financial support for Novara Media. We don't have the £60 million to play with that GB News had, but I think we are a more sustainable organisation. And that is thanks to our very generous supporters. If you are already donating the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, we thank you so much. You are what makes this possible. If not, please do go to novaramedia.com/support. Rupert Murdoch has announced plans to launch a new TV station in the UK. It will be called Talk TV, and it will be fronted by Piers Morgan. Earlier in the year, News UK had scrapped plans for a TV station, but sources suggest Murdoch's mind was changed by the rise and fall of GB News. Apparently, the launch of GB News showed there was a market for right-wing television, if only it were done professionally. The fees involved in the tie-up with Piers Morgan remain unknown, but it's understood the cost is being shared across multiple Murdoch-owned platforms. Murdoch will host a prime-time weeknight show on Talk TV, which will also be broadcast on US streaming service Fox Nation and Sky News Australia. He will also have a column in The Sun, which will be reprinted in the New York Post, and has signed a book deal with the Murdoch-owned HarperCollins. Morgan will also be hosting a series of true crime documentaries to be shown on Murdoch-owned channels across the globe. This is how Piers Morgan announced the news. Breaking. I've gone home. Great to be rejoining Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation after 28 years, the place I started my media career with the boss who gave me my big first break. We're going to have a lot of fun. Aaron, do you think this signing of Piers Morgan by Rupert Murdoch is going to make Talk TV a success where GB News failed?
Great question. I mean, you have to be fair with Piers Morgan. I mean, he's a terrible human being, but it wasn't that long ago that he was, by a very long stretch, the most effective journalist in the country when it came to covering COVID-19. He was really good. He was really forensic. He was very entertaining. And so on stuff like, social liberties, trans rights, LGBT rights, this sort of anti-left stuff, the Meghan Markle stuff. Yeah, clearly he's just an idiot. And I'm sure Murdoch wants that too, the kind of bigoted right-wing stuff. But he's also a very good, entertaining journalist on popular issues. I mean, he did a very similar thing when he was at the Daily Mirror. He was the editor. He captured a big part of the zeitgeist in terms of opposition to the war, which is ultimately why he was sacked, because he published on the front page of the newspaper images that were ultimately proven to be false. They weren't real images, but of course there were things going on like we saw in those images, but they just didn't happen to be accurate. So interesting guy. He's been the best journalist when it comes to COVID-19 by a long way. At the same time, as he sort of insinuates there, his career started at News International. He was the bizarre columnist at The Sun, Michael. He was a gossip columnist, a showbiz gossip columnist. I think he still is in many ways, not much more than that. But I think he is clearly a big get. He is a big name. He's big in the US. He's big here. He's got a big social media footprint. I think if you were going to launch a TV channel around somebody and it was to appeal to a right-wing audience, I think he's a good bet. I think Andrew Neil's a bit older. I think he's a bit more sort of, wonky, inside politics, Westminstery. And I think, Piers Morgan likes the more culture wars stuff. I think Piers Morgan could have a YouTube channel where he does interviews and videos and so on. It could do super well. It could be super big. I think he's a big personality. So I can see why Murdoch's done it. But for me, Michael, what's really strange is you look at Talk Radio, you look at Times Radio, you look at this kind of this space where it's clearly going to be a very low budget TV station, Michael, this kind of hybrid podcast video aesthetic, I suspect. And when I say low budget, I mean low budget for mainstream media. And I wonder, why would you have Talk Radio if you've also got this? Why would you have Times Radio? So it feels like there's a bit too much going on. Is that because there's just no strategy and he's throwing as much stuff as he possibly can and hopes something sticks? I mean, I feel personally that Talk Radio is a bit of a failure. When you talked about the introduction for Piers Morgan then, I mean, it really just shows Rupert Murdoch is just a machine for lies and hate and misinformation. Radio stations, newspapers, TV channels, and even a book publisher. So you'll have your book published with HarperCollins. It'll be reviewed in the Sunday Times, and you'll be interviewed on Talk Radio and Times Radio. It's a whole media ecology, which is basically the Murdoch sphere. Very, very concerning. Clearly, in a democracy, you shouldn't have somebody with that much media power and political influence. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be a success by any measure, because I think trying to make money out of news media in this country has always been very difficult, particularly in television. Sky has lost millions every year for decades. So I don't think this is about making money. I think this is about trying to exert political influence in a world where the Sun is less influential, in a world where the Times is less influential, and in a world where, quite frankly, Times Radio, Talk Radio have kind of failed.
No, I think the important thing there is that this probably isn't about money. So, I mean, it's probably the case that Rupert Murdoch has deeper pockets than whoever funded GB News. And although actually they had some big deep pockets as well. But Rupert Murdoch, I mean, I think this will be more likely to be successful because Piers Morgan is a bigger draw than Andrew Neil, and also because even though talk radio is pretty shoddy, it's just sort of like the ugly sibling of LBC. They at least have some experience, they're kind of working their way up towards a TV channel in a way, aren't they? Whereas GB News really tried to create it out of nothing. So you would have had a load of producers and journalists and people in front of the camera who just really weren't on the same page, which is why the whole thing's been a catastrophic mess. Whereas with this Talk TV thing, it will have grown out of an organisation where you do have people on the same malicious page. It's a really malicious page. All in the same building. You've got Talk Radio, which is Julia Hartley-Brewer, trying to, sow doubt about COVID-19, lockdowns don't work, I'm going to break all of the rules, saying some really nasty things about trans people. Then in the same building, you've got the Times Radio people who are trying to say, we're proper journalists and we're really cultured and we're the respectable people who you can get on, on your TV channels or whatever. The whole thing, I find it very, very unpleasant. This is just going to be one more, element of that Murdoch empire, which has been so pernicious for so long. And I think, I worry it is going to continue to be because he keeps shape-shifting as the tabloid industry goes down the drain. He's trying to reinvent the organization as a TV channel grown out of these, yes, not incredibly successful, but somewhat influential radio shows. Do you think, am I being overly worried?
No, I think you're right, Michael. I think here's some good news, and that is that Rupert Murdoch is going to die. He's an old man. He's not going to be around forever. I think he's in his early 90s now, really mid 80s. I don't wish anybody death. I don't. But the brutal reality is he's an older man, and he's not going to be around for very long.
He's 90,
and even his own, he's 90. So even his own son, James Murdoch, has distanced himself from his father when it comes to climate change. Even his own family don't really like the guy when it comes to quite key political dividing lines. So that's the good news. He will die quite soon. Of course, he has some of the best healthcare in the world. He'll probably live into his early hundreds. Fine. I hope he enjoys, what he has left of his life with Jerry Hall, even though he is arguably the most toxic person in the English-speaking world in terms of making our politics and public life worse and rotten over the last couple of decades. I think he is number one. He's numero uno. No doubt about it. But often you hear the retort, well, it's not the person, it's their ideas, and when they pass away, somebody else will take their place. I don't really buy that with Rupert Murdoch. He's a very singular figure when you're talking about the rise and mass appeal of these ideas, these bigotries. Since he first entered the UK news market in the late 1960s, when he bought the News of the World. And of course, that shut down for very disgusting reasons. That should have been the end of him, really. But it wasn't 10 years ago. So I see where you're coming from, Michael, but he's made a lot of bad calls commercially and politically in the last 20 years. MySpace is obviously the most memorable one. It feels like the last big hit of his was really Fox News. The Sunday Times has undergone a bit of a reinvention. They've kind of gone back to what they were, or they're trying to go back to what they were pre-Andrew Neil. The quality paper, good reporting, long-form investigations. Andrew Neil will say, well, we always had that when I was there. The point was you were getting rid of it constantly. It was you were filing it down with a bit of sandpaper. So I'm optimistic when it comes to this stuff, Michael. I think we have major problems in the UK media landscape because of billionaires, and that's not going away. But this particular billionaire, I don't think he exerts anything like the political influence he did, say, 10, 15 years ago. But I think the mid-1990s, fundamentally, both major political parties felt they had to listen to him on every single issue. I think that's just gone. You look at what the Tories just did on national insurance, Rupert Murdoch would not have supported that. You look at what Labour's talking about with regards to increasing minimum wage. Rupert Murdoch wouldn't support that. And I think as that sort of neoliberal consensus collapses and both parties address it in different ways, sadly, the Tories are doing that better, more quickly, more effectively than Labour. Ultimately, if Labour want to ever win an election ever again, they're going to have to do the same thing. I think that's a problem for Rupert Murdoch, because he's fixed to that thing. He's fixed to that economic model with a kind of a big right-wing turn on immigration and social issues. You can't really have that. The economic model is the thing that ultimately people want change for. You can talk about immigration and refugees and get them angry about it, but if you're at the same time saying we're not going to do anything about wages or pensions or stagnating living standards, they aren't going to like you. So I'm not optimistic generally, but I think with Rupert Murdoch, look, he's going to probably be dead in the next 10 years. we should celebrate when that happens, Michael. Again, I don't say that very often. I hope this is being recorded and somebody puts it on social media. Rupert Murdoch is uniquely toxic in creating a depraved media environment in our country. He's responsible for horrendous things.
I've got a comment. Oh, that comment's disappeared. I'll go on to a story which was breaking as we were live. We've talked on tonight's show about David Evans' habit of spuriously launching disciplinary investigations against members. Last week, we talked about how the chair of Young Labour got caught in that net. And now, apparently, a left-wing MP has also been subject to these spurious investigations which fall apart under the smallest bit of scrutiny. It's Kate Osborne. She is the MP for South Tyneside. She was one of the 2019 intake, as I say, on the left of the party. And she has tweeted the following statement. Without warning this morning, the Labour Party served me with a notice of investigation making serious allegations of breach of the party rules. I was shocked and unnerved by getting such a letter and was puzzled at what the party was saying about me. I thought my job as an MP was on the line and that I faced public shaming in front of my constituents, as some will always say there's no smoke without fire. Well, there is. The charges were completely baseless. The evidence relied on made no sense. There never was anything that was a breach of the rules. I was told I could not discuss the matter with anyone except Samaritans. Luckily, I had access to immediate legal advice, and my solicitor wrote a very strongly worded letter utterly rejecting the allegations. Shortly after the legal letter, the party withdrew the investigation, claiming it was an administrative error, and apologised for the mistake and the distress it had caused. I had been put through a very worrying ordeal for no valid reason whatsoever. She goes on. What does this say about an apparent mission to threaten members with expulsion from their own party? There is little, if any, consideration being given to the impact on members of receiving such threatening letters. An apology after the event is one thing, but the effect is awful. How many members have had similar letters but do not have access to specialist legal advice? I am one of the fortunate ones, but how many others are left stewing whilst ill-considered, baseless allegations are rained down upon them? It is time for a serious rethink by those running the governance and legal unit about what they are doing to members. I have decided to speak out because if they come after elected MPs with baseless claims, they will come after others. We need a serious look at ourselves and what is happening to our party. I'd like to thank everyone who has supported me throughout this very difficult day, particularly my union, Unite. Wow. Aaron. This is exactly the same as that investigation they launched into the chair of Young Labour, it seems. Now, this is the same thing has been done to Kate Osborne MP, where they sort of send a spurious letter saying we're starting an investigation. The Labour Party is challenged on it, and the Labour Party say, oh, it's an administrative error. As if disciplinary investigations are someone hitting the wrong button. You know, it just seems like the party machine is completely out of control.
Well, Michael, I'm very sad that you haven't mentioned I broke this story actually shortly before Kate Osborne tweeted that.
You should have told me.
You should be bigging up the organisation. Well, I mean, we were going live shortly before, so shortly after rather. I mean, I think I tweeted the story about half an hour earlier. I knew a bit early on, but I hadn't seen any documentary evidence, and I can tell our audience tonight the reason that she was being investigated is because she said to Rebecca Long Bailey when she was suspended, solidarity. That was her offence. That was it.
Wow.
That was it.
Well, Rebecca Long Bailey also was never suspended, right? So that was when Rebecca Long Bailey had to resign from the front bench. So that wasn't a suspension.
Yeah. No. I don't believe she was investigated. I mean, maybe she was, but which is an important point, Michael, because a lot of people said that. Is every single person who said solidarity to Rebecca Long Bailey when she lost her position in the shadow front bench, is every single person now under investigation? And you said it's an organisation out of control. I think it's actually worse than that. It's not the organisation here. I think this is rogue elements within the organisation that are out of control. This is the very same day where the Labour's NEC implemented rule changes, which basically are the EHRC recommendations about what the disciplinary process should look like. They've changed the rules to basically integrate those into the party. The very same day where they sort of talk about, we're creating an independent disciplinary structure, and Annalise Dodds is saying that, we're going to deal with this terrible issue. The very same day, her own colleague is contacted and told that she's going to be investigated. She doesn't know by who. I don't think it's by GLUE, the Governance and Legal Unit. Presumably, like with Jess Barnard, it's just rogue elements close to Lotto, close to the leader's office, and David Evans and Keir Starmer. And she kicks back, and then they disappear. Is this another error? So but clearly this is the complete opposite of an independent complaints process, clearly. And I think it is really important, Michael. I think obviously the EHRC don't care. Obviously they don't care. But I think somebody needs to say, look, this is clearly not compliant with the recommendations you laid out in the report, clearly. We're not just talking about, Bill and Ben, two local members up the road who sit over, a pint in the Dog and Duck and have a couple of lagers. This is the head of Young Labour and Labour Party MP. And I think there are many, many more. It's just that it's not public knowledge yet. Is this about intimidating the left? Absolutely. Does it show that there's effectively no discipline in the party's disciplinary process? Absolutely. Is Keir Starmer or David Evans going to do anything about it? No, nothing at all. I don't think it's going to stop. This is just about quotidian wearing people down to get them out. That's the whole point of this, Michael. And I think the thing that really disgusts me the most is saying you can't tell anybody, but you can talk to the Samaritans about it if you're feeling suicidal. I mean, this is abusive behavior, Michael. This is abusive behavior. If an employer said this to a member of staff, people on the left, socialists, even centre-left melts who think Keir Starmer is the best thing since sliced bread, would say, what an appalling employer. People like Ian Dunn or James O'Brien would say, what a terrible employer. Are they going to do the same thing now? Because it's become the default in Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Presumably they're not, because they happen to agree politically with the guy, so we have a double standing going on. I think it's just remarkable. I mean, Christ, you think these people are going to change the labour market in the interest of working people when they treat their own people like this? When they lay off workers and impose redundancies and don't consult? And when they have MPs, their colleagues in Parliament, treated like trash? No. Judge people by what they do, not by what they say.
We've got some comments on this. Saul with a fiver. Solidarity Kate Osborne MP. Coincidence that the Labour investigation into her was withdrawn straight after her solicitor wrote the party a letter. Obviously not a coincidence. And this is, really important to mention, because this is the same as what happened with Jess Barnard, which is that they only withdrew the investigation after, in her case, she tweeted about it and it got a lot of traction from people with lots of followers. In this case, it only got withdrawn after a solicitor's letter was sent. And I think what this tells us is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. These spurious investigations, these spurious suspensions are happening everywhere to hundreds and hundreds of Labour members, and many of them won't have the clout on Twitter as the chair of Young Labour, or won't have a solicitor as good as an elected MP. These are, the most significant, important roles you can really have in the Labour Party, an MP or a chair of one of its, constituent organisations. And these people are getting these letters. There will be loads more people getting these letters who are not in such a strong position to resist them. And I think this does just show us, what a disastrous state the Labour Party is currently in. Also, thanks to Mary Dwyer for a £10 super chat, and everyone else for your donations this evening. Aaron Bastani, any final comments before we go?
Yeah, I had one more thing I wanted to mention, Michael, which is I have been told about somebody who's being investigated for tweeting anti-Semitic material. Would you like to know what the anti-Semitic material is?
Yeah, go on.
It is me, when I tweeted about Ed Balls, he was questioning whether or not Jeremy Corbyn was anti-Semitic, and I tweeted basically something like, "This you," with him wearing a Nazi uniform while he was at university. Somebody retweeted that, and apparently they've now been investigated for anti-Semitism because they have a problem about Ed Balls wearing a Nazi uniform, and they think that might be not that's probably a bad thing. We should probably talk about that, right? But if you even tweet the image, apparently that's now tantamount to racism. They're being investigated for it. Hundreds of people like this. And like you say, if you've not got recourse to good legal advice, you're going to get stitched up. It's just disgusting, Michael. And I think fundamentally, do you want people who behave like that running the country? I don't. When it comes to civil liberties, the rule of law, they'll be worse than the Tories. Of course they will be. Labour in the mid-2000s were. It's the exact same people. Peter Mandelson, David Evans, and so on. So, deeply concerning. We don't want these people running the criminal justice system. Are you kidding me? It'd be terrible.
If you have a vote at Labour Party conference, do vote no for David Evans being confirmed as General Secretary. Aaron Bastani, it's been a pleasure speaking to you as always on a Friday evening.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you so much.
And thank you to everyone for your super chats and for watching tonight. We'll be back on Monday at 7 p.m, so make sure to hit subscribe. Have a great weekend. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. good night.